Wax is running down brass candle holders, warm and slow, and the air inside Lisbon's churches smells of smoke, damp stone, and wool cloaks drying on shoulders. On the morning of 1755, All Saints' Day, the city is already full of prayer, and by 9:40, only minutes away from becoming a ruin. This is the kind of disaster that arrives in layers. First, the earth, then the water, then the fire. And before we reach any of that, Lisbon still looks solid, rich, devout, busy, almost serene. Churches are packed with worshippers. Families have come early. Candles burn by the thousands. In the harbor, trade still belongs to the living world. Nothing in the light or the bells or the clear morning air tells you that the city is standing on borrowed time. Far from the first falling stone, Europe is busy with ordinary things. Voltaire has no idea this day will follow him into verse. Immanuel Kant does not yet know that a city on the Atlantic edge will push him toward explanation instead of consolation. And in Portugal itself, Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo, the man history will remember as Pombal, is not yet the hard voice of command. By nightfall, he will speak a sentence that turns panic into policy. But not yet. For now, the morning still belongs to ritual. Footsteps on church floors, bells passing over the rooftops, a crowd pressed close inside walls that have stood long enough to feel eternal. Then, just before the shaking, something else reaches the city first. A sound from under the ground. Low, heavy, and wrong. If you want the rest of this story told with the same care, subscribe now. We're only at the last quiet minute. That sound lasts only a moment, but it changes the air before the floor moves. At about 9:40, inside churches crowded for All Saints' Day, people feel the first tremor through their shoes, through kneeling benches, through the stone itself. It is not yet the violence they will remember. First comes confusion. Charles Davy, the English eyewitness whose letter will travel far beyond Portugal, is in Lisbon as the morning breaks apart. Around him, bells that had just been ringing over the city fall silent against a new noise. Deep, grinding, almost like weight dragged under the earth. Then the shake becomes impossible to mistake. Walls shudder. Candles jump in their holders. Hot wax spatters hands and sleeves. Somewhere close by, glass gives way. In church after church, the danger is not only the motion, it is the ceiling above it. Packed worshippers look up too late. Stone that had seemed permanent begins to split at its joints. Dust sifts down first, soft as flour. Then larger fragments strike pavement. Then whole sections give way. The smell changes all at once. Wax, incense, lime, broken plaster, smoke from snuffed and fallen flame. And while Lisbon folds inward, far away, the men who will help define its meaning are still in the unbroken morning. Voltaire does not know a poem is coming. Immanuel Kant does not know a question has already been thrown at him across Europe. Even Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo hasn't yet stepped into the role history is preparing for him. The first shock is still moving through the city when people begin to run for the streets. Not knowing the streets are about to become traps of their own. By 9:41, the first instinct is simple: get outside. In a smaller quake, that might save you. In Lisbon, with its tight lanes and heavy stone fronts, it becomes another gamble. People push through doorways into streets already shaking, their hands scraped on plaster, their mouths full of dust. Charles Davy makes it out alive, but what he reaches is not safety. The ground is still rolling underfoot. Balconies snap loose. Roof tiles come down like thrown plates. A wall opens, tips, and drops into the street with the kind of force that turns a crowd into silence in a single beat. The air is white now, thick with lime and powdered mortar, and every breath tastes bitter. Somewhere beyond the worst of the crush, King Jose I has escaped being sealed inside stone only by chance and timing. He is outside when the city begins to come apart. He can see buildings fail, can hear them too. Not one collapse, but many, close together, a chain of impacts rolling across Lisbon. That memory will stay with him long after the ground stills. He will never trust masonry the same way again. Then the movement returns. A second shock runs through what the first one weakened. What had leaned now falls. What had cracked now breaks open. People who survived the first collapse are struck by the next. And because this is All Saints' Day, fire is already waiting in the rubble. Candles overturned into wood, cloth, paper, and splintered pews. By 9:45, the city is shaking and beginning to burn. And still, the strangest turn of the morning has not yet shown itself at the river. By about 9:46, the worst of the motion has eased, but Lisbon does not feel still. It feels stunned. The ground gives small, sickening jolts under broken feet. Dust hangs in the air so thick that people wipe their eyes and see almost nothing, only outlines, sparks, and the pale blur of smashed stone. In the streets, the logic of survival changes by the second. A doorway is dangerous. A church is deadly. A narrow lane can become a chute for falling masonry. So the living begin to move toward open space, away from walls, away from towers, away from roofs shedding tiles and beams. The river seems to promise exactly what the city no longer can: room, air, horizon. Charles Davy, still among ruins and cries for help, is close enough to see that the fire started before anyone could organize against it. All Saints' Day had filled the churches with flame, and now those little flames are everywhere they should never be: in splintered wood, under fallen drapery, beside paper, inside collapsed rooms where nobody can reach them. What the quake did not crush, smoke may yet take. And while Lisbon stumbles toward the waterfront, Europe is still unaware of the scale of what has happened. Voltaire has yet to read the first report. Immanuel Kant has not yet begun to think through causes. That comes later. Right now, the city is making decisions with no language for what comes after a great shaking. Except this: go where the sky is open. So they do. By a little after 10, survivors are arriving at the riverbank in waves, coughing, ash-covered, bleeding, carrying children, dragging the stunned, stepping out onto the broad stone by the water. And then they notice something impossible. The Tagus is pulling away from them. By a little after 10, the riverfront has become the new center of hope. Survivors pour out of shattered lanes and smoke, reaching the broad open space beside the Tagus with the raw relief of people who think they have found the one place in Lisbon where stone cannot fall on them again. The marble quay feels solid underfoot, cold, flat, exposed to the sky. No roofs, no towers, no cracked church vaults overhead. Mothers clutch children there. Men lean over, coughing up dust. Others turn back toward the city and watch a brown haze rising over the rooftops. Fire is beginning to show through it now, thin orange seams in the wreckage. Behind them, the old center is breaking apart. Ahead of them, the water is doing something no one present knows how to read. It is pulling away. The receding sea does not vanish all at once. First, it slips back from the edge, then farther still, leaving mud, debris, stranded fish, dark weed, things that should be hidden and are suddenly bare to daylight. People point, some step closer, some descend to look. After an earthquake, open ground makes sense. Curiosity makes sense too. In 1755, in this part of Europe, there is no common word that warns a crowd what this means. Charles Davy is high enough to see the movement spread along the waterfront, a human drift toward the exposed riverbed. At that same hour, Voltaire is still only a man in another country with an unwritten poem ahead of him. Immanuel Kant is still unaware. Enlightenment optimism has not yet received its blow. Then, on the horizon of the Tagus, the river changes shape. A dark rising line, coming in fast. What they are seeing is the river stand up. At first, that dark line is hard to understand. Distance can make danger look slow. But within moments, the shape sharpens into a wall of moving weight, coming straight up the Tagus toward the people who chose open ground, because open ground had just saved them from stone. On the marble quay, there is almost no good direction left. Behind the crowd, Lisbon is choked with wreckage, smoke, broken streets, and fire beginning to catch hold. In front of them, the exposed bed of the river is vanishing under returning water. Some stare, some run too late, some freeze where they stand, their shoes slipping on polished stone made treacherous by mud and panic. Then it arrives. About 40 minutes after the first shock, the wave strikes the waterfront with a force no prayer on All Saints' Day had prepared them for. It surges up the river high enough to drown the refuge itself. People are taken where they stand. Bodies, timber, boats, cargo, shattered pieces of the port, all of it turns together in the same violent motion. The quay that felt safe a minute ago becomes the most exposed place in the city. Charles Davy survives far enough away to witness the aftermath, and that distance matters. If he had stood with the others at the water, his letter would never have been written. If he had died there, one of the clearest English accounts of this morning would have disappeared with him. And when the first rush pulls back, Lisbon has barely time to breathe, because the water is not finished with the city yet, and neither is the fire. The water leaves wreckage behind, but it does not leave order. By the time the first great rush has torn through the waterfront, Lisbon is fighting on 3 fronts at once. Broken ground, broken streets, and fire spreading through what the quake and the wave did not take. Now the candles from All Saints' Day begin to matter more than anyone could have guessed that morning. Thousands had been burning in churches, chapels, side altars, private rooms. After the shaking, they are loose flame in timber, cloth, paper, oil, and collapsed beams. Smoke starts low, then thickens. In some streets, it crawls along the ground. In others, it climbs through shattered windows and catches the upper floors. The smell changes again. Not just lime and river mud now, but scorched wood, wet ash, tar, and something harsher underneath. Charles Davy survives long enough to watch the city move from impact into exhaustion. People who escaped the churches are now trapped by heat. People who fled the water are driven back by flame. The same morning keeps changing its method, and because wells, pipes, and access routes are damaged, the fire cannot be met cleanly. It spreads through confusion, feeding on the very materials that made Lisbon prosperous. Outside the worst of the burning center, King Jose I is alive, but shaken into a different man. The city that held his court has become a field of smoke and splintered stone. Somewhere beyond that smoke, Sebastião José de Carvalho y Melo is still only a minister moving toward disaster, not yet the voice that will seize it. By late morning, one question is starting to outrun every prayer in Portugal. Who is in command now? By late morning, power in Portugal is no longer a matter of ceremony. It is a matter of who can still think inside smoke, aftershock, hunger, and fear. The king is alive but shaken. Lisbon is broken open, and Sebastião José de Carvalho y Melo is moving toward the center of it. He does not arrive to a city waiting for instruction in any neat sense. He arrives to scattered survivors, blocked roads, fire climbing through damaged neighborhoods, and a court that has lost the protection of stone. King José I, already marked by what he has seen, is outside, not in safety exactly, but in the only safety that still feels possible. Open air, distance from walls, room to breathe. This is where the shape of the disaster changes again. Up to now, the day has belonged to physics, shaking ground, rushing water, flame finding fuel. From here on, it begins to belong to decisions. Who will clear bodies? Who will feed the living? Who will stop theft before panic turns into something even larger? In the same ruined country, Gabriel Malagrida will soon offer one answer: sin, punishment, repentance. But Carvalho y Melo's answer begins somewhere colder, harder, more immediate: procedure. While Europe still does not understand what has happened in Lisbon, the first real contest inside Portugal is already taking form. Not between belief and unbelief. That comes later, and more bitterly. It is between paralysis and command, between grief as feeling and grief turned into tasks. By afternoon, the chief minister stands before a king whose city has been struck by earthquake, wave, and fire in a single morning. José I asks what must be done, and Carvalho y Melo gives the answer that will outlive both of them. The answer is brutally simple: bury the dead and feed the living. That line, given by Sebastião José de Carvalho y Melo in the immediate aftermath, is remembered because it does not try to explain the catastrophe. It does not argue with heaven. It does not pause over innocence, guilt, or fate. It starts with bodies, food, and time. In a city hit by earthquake, wave, and fire on the same day, delay is its own kind of killer. From that moment, the shape of authority changes. King José I remains the monarch, but the chief minister becomes the working mind of the emergency. Grief has to be pushed aside, or at least compressed, because the tasks are endless. The dead cannot remain where they fell. The living cannot wander hungry through smoke and rubble. And property left exposed in a shattered capital will draw theft as surely as flame draws air. This is the hard turn of the story. Up to now, the day has been all noise, impact, drowning, collapse. Now it becomes administration under pressure. The city still burns. Aftershocks still threaten. The smell of ash and wet debris hangs over Lisbon. Yet inside that ruin, decisions begin to move faster than mourning. And that speed matters for another reason too. The longer the streets remain full of bodies, the more fear grows. The longer food remains scattered or inaccessible, the more panic mutates into disorder. Carvalho y Melo understands that survival after a disaster is not only rescue, it is command made visible. Meanwhile, Gabriel Malagrida's interpretation is approaching from another direction, one that will give many survivors a language for pain, and to give Portugal a second battle just as dangerous as the first. Because now the city must be governed and explained. From there, the emergency hardens. Carvalho y Melo's order is not gentle, and it is not meant to be. A city torn apart in one morning cannot be left to drift on grief alone. Food has to move. The dead have to be removed. What remains of authority has to be seen in the streets, or else fear will begin making decisions of its own. In the smoke and wreckage, that becomes the real contest. Not only survival, but whether Lisbon stays a governed place at all. So the response turns practical, fast, and severe. The ruined capital is treated less like a mourning chamber than a problem that can still spread. Fire is still eating through damaged quarters. Bodies lie where stone dropped them, where water threw them, where people ran and did not get up again. Supplies exist, but not in the places where panic has carried the living. Every hour left unmanaged makes the next hour worse. This is where many later readers divide. Some will see necessary discipline, others will see coldness. But on that day, inside the remains of Portugal's capital, the minister is betting everything on a brutal idea: that order, even harsh order, can save more lives than sorrow can. And while that machinery of command begins to form, another machinery is forming too. One made of words, sermons, and interpretation. Gabriel Malagrida is not yet the man facing Carvalho y Melo directly, but his kind of answer is already rising through the same smoke. For survivors, an explanation can feel as urgent as bread, sometimes more urgent. That is what makes this moment larger than logistics. Lisbon is becoming more than a ruined city. It is becoming an argument, and Europe is about to hear it. That argument begins in the ruins themselves. For many survivors, the need to know why can bite almost as hard as hunger. A city does not crack open on a holy day, churches full, candles still burning, and leave people satisfied with silence. Gabriel Malagrida steps into that wound with an answer ready-made for grief. This was punishment, a warning, a call to repentance. In a shaken capital, that kind of meaning travels fast. And you can understand why. The dead include the devout and the careless, the rich and the poor, people at prayer and people in the street. The mind reaches for pattern. It wants cause that feels moral, not mechanical. Carvalho y Melo is trying to keep food moving and bodies cleared. Malagrida is offering something different. Not bread, not order, but explanation. In a disaster, explanation is also a form of power. Then the news leaves Portugal. Letters, eyewitness accounts, and printed reports begin carrying Lisbon into the rest of Europe. Charles Davies' testimony matters here because it gives foreign readers a human scale, a man close enough to hear, see, survive, and write. Through voices like his, the catastrophe crosses borders before anyone can fully understand it. Smoke, water, crushed stone, crowded churches on All Saints' Day. These details arrive first. Reflection comes after. And when those reports reach thinkers already invested in reason, progress, and design, they do not land softly. Because this was not a battlefield. It was not a plague slowly unfolding. It was a morning, a city, a service, a bell, and then collapse. Somewhere in Switzerland, Voltaire reads, "He is about to do something far more dangerous than mourn the dead. He is going to ask what their deaths do to the idea that this is the best of all possible worlds." Voltaire does not answer Lisbon with comfort. When the reports reach him, the blow lands exactly where Europe thought itself strongest, in its confidence that reason, order, and a good creation ultimately fit together. Enlightenment optimism had room for war, disease, even private misfortune. What it did not handle well was a holy morning collapsing on worshippers, then drowning survivors, then burning the rest. Lisbon was too concentrated, too public, too cruelly timed. So Voltaire writes against easy reassurance. First the poem, then later Candide, not as dry philosophy, but as protest sharpened by image. Children, prayer, church walls, the random sweep of death. These are not details that stay politely inside theology. They force a question. If suffering falls without moral pattern, what becomes of the claim that all is ordered for the best? That question does not stay in literature. It spreads because the catastrophe itself had spread through print. Charles Davies' witness account helps make the event vivid to readers who will never smell the smoke or see the water move. Gabriel Malagrida is still trying to give it sacred meaning. Carvalho y Melo is still making power answer with action. And now, Voltaire turns the same ruins into an argument against philosophical optimism. But notice what is changing here. The debate is no longer only about Lisbon. The city has become evidence in a trial about the world itself. One side says disaster must still fit a plan, however hidden. The other says the dead at prayer are already a rebuttal. And then, in Königsberg, another mind enters the wreckage from a different direction. Immanuel Kant reads the same disaster and does something that matters just as much as Voltaire's anger. He tries to explain the shock without beginning from punishment. Kant's move is quieter than Voltaire's, but in some ways even more radical. He does not write as a poet staring at ruined faith. He writes as a young philosopher trying to treat the disaster as an event in nature, something that happened in the world, not only something said by God through the world. His explanation is wrong by modern standards, but that is not the point. The point is where he chooses to begin, with cause. That shift matters because it changes what counts as a proper answer to catastrophe. Gabriel Malagrida asks what Lisbon had done to deserve this. Voltaire asks what such suffering does to the promise of a rational moral order. Immanuel Kant, from Königsberg, starts asking what physical process might produce such violence at all. You can feel the ground moving under European thought almost as clearly as the ground moved under the city. Meanwhile, in Portugal, the older battle is still alive. Carvalho y Melo is not writing philosophy. He is remaking power through necessity. King Jose I is living with the memory of stone failing over and over again. The city that had seemed fixed is now a place to be redrawn. And that, too, is a kind of argument. One made in streets, timber, foundations, and plans. Because once you stop treating disaster only as a moral message, a new question appears behind it. If the earth can do this, then how should people build? How should a capital be laid out? What kind of city admits that stone, wealth, and piety did not protect it? That is where the story is heading now. Not back into prayer, and not only into print, but into the shape of Lisbon rebuilt by the man who answered the king with 6 hard words. What follows is not restoration. It is replacement. Carvalho y Melo, the minister who will become known as Pombal, does not try to stitch the old Lisbon back together stone by stone. After the fires burn for roughly 5 days, he drives a different answer into the ground. A city laid out on a grid, wider, straighter, planned with the memory of shaking built into it. The catastrophe enters architecture. It enters government. It enters the idea of what a capital is for. King Jose I survives the day, but he does not come through it unchanged. Voltaire carries it into poetry and then into Candide. Immanuel Kant carries it into early scientific writing. Gabriel Malagrida carries the older explanation toward its own bitter end. The same morning keeps unfolding for years. That is the true aftershock of the 1755 Great Lisbon earthquake. Not only fallen churches, drowned crowds, and fire in the streets, but a harder habit of mind. When the ground proved that prayer, wealth, and stone could fail together, Europe did not stop believing all at once. It did something more unsettling. It began to ask what must be built when comfort is no longer enough. And so the city rises again, under a new logic: timber, lines, measurements, orders, food, burials, foundations. A map drawn by people who had seen walls come down. Today, if you stand where the river once looked safe, the water moves as if it remembers nothing. The stones are clean. The sky is open. But under that calm, the lesson remains. Some worlds end in a single morning, and the next one is drafted by whoever can still act through smoke. If you want more stories where history turns in a single day, stay with the channel.